You guys are my home, and Angie and I miss you guys deeply. It's Oakland, California, and I will never mix. It will not happen. But we're just so glad. I just got back Tuesday, and while I'm in the Philippines, I get a email from John says, "Hey, can you talk to Sunday, February 12th?" I go, without thinking, and go, "Yep." Until I realize that's only 5 days after I get back. And 16 hours jet lag isn't as easy now as it was 10 years ago. Maybe I can lower this down, that'll help a little. And Tuesday night, I went to bed at 10 o'clock after getting back. I left Tuesday at 10 o'clock at night in the Philippines, in Manila. And I arrived in California at 6:35 the same day at night. And when I left, it was 52 degrees in Oakland, California, and I get to Manila, and it's 92. Gasp. So I acclimate to the weather, right? I come back, and I'm freezing. But anyway, I went to bed at 10 o'clock with my wife Tuesday night. Wednesday, I went to bed at 7:30 at night, and I wake up at 11:30 at night, and stay up to about 4 in the morning, and finally get a couple hours sleep. And the next night, I do a little better, went to bed at 7:30, and I wake up at 2 in the morning. And Friday, same time, except I managed to go to 3:10. Last night, I finally got a full night's sleep. So 16 hours it's not that I'm getting older, I'm sure. It's nothing to do with it. Well, I came here to tell you about the Philippines, and right here, this is in a river. In the purple shirt is Christian Corpuz, a minister in the Paniqui Church of Christ in Tarlac, which is a province. It'd be similar to our county. And I'll tell you more about Christian and the congregation there as we go on. Next slide, please. I want to talk to you one of my favorite evangelists, if you will, in God's Word. In Luke, the 8th chapter, it talks about a man who is possessed of demons. And we know the story, how he cast the demons out, and the pigs got to go for a swim in which they never recovered. And this man was demon-possessed. He had made his home in the tombs and the graves and the caves. They bound him. They couldn't break by chains. And Jesus restored him into his right mind. And people were scared when they saw him and saw that he was in his right mind. It scared them. They asked him to leave. And I find similar things today is that people don't want to hear the truth. They want to live their lives. And when you tell them the truth, it scares them. Next slide, please. But what I like about this young man is he asked God, in fact, he pleaded to Jesus, "Let me go with you. I want to go with you. You healed me." And Jesus said, "Nope, you can't go with me." He says, "I want you to go back to your town and tell them what great things I did." And he did. He went to the area of Decapolis. And when we look into what we see in archaeological finds, we have found digs and finds of a large Christian community in the area of Decapolis. And you don't have to think too far out of the box to realize where did these people hear about Jesus in the first place? From this man right here. And there's lots of stories, lots of things you can learn. Gratitude. He was grateful for what Jesus did to him. And that's what I love about him. But he went and did on something. And that's kind of what inspired me to get into the Philippines and do what I do. A lot of people say that's work. And it is work, family. It is work. But I love what Rush Limbaugh said. I heard him on the radio. He says, your job isn't a job when you love what you do. And I love what I'm doing. My passion in life is to tell others about Jesus, those who are willing to listen. But not only that, I love to teach people how to present the gospel in a friendly and a kind, loving way. Let them make the decision as to whether they want to act on it or not. But our job is just to tell others what I call the Jesus story. Next slide. I love this verse, 1 Corinthians 9:16. Yet when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, for I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. And that's the way that I feel. God has given me an ability to learn, to teach, and if I miss an opportunity, I kick myself sometimes when I walk out of the grocery store or I strike up a conversation, the opportunity arises, and I don't take advantage of it. And that just bugs me for days. And why did I not take advantage of it? It's not that I don't brag on my ability. I didn't give myself the ability. God gave me the talent. So I have nothing to boast on. Next slide. This is my staff that I looked on. Up here in the left corner is Urban Gonzalez. That's his wife, Raslyn. Behind him, he is the main minister at the Colosio Church of Christ. He's now 40 years old. He thinks he's old. And at 69, I'm saying, no, you're not old, bud. But he is my co-director in the Philippines. And without him, nothing gets done. He's the man that I send the funds to. He makes all the arrangements. He plans the itinerary. He does the traveling to cities and scouts out areas. We try to go in a central location to where we have congregations in the area that can come meet there, and he just does all the work in this. And without his abilities, without his effort, this work doesn't get done. Another thing I love about his family, I don't have a picture of him because he's got a son that they named Steve. I don't know where they got that name, but he's 2 years old. But he didn't want to be around me, except when he went bye-bye, he'd go, "Bye-bye, Lolo." Well, Lolo is Tagalog for grandpa. And so he always had a joy. He'd always smile and say, "Bye-bye, Lolo." But that's as close as I could get to him. And the next picture is Alvin Posario. He's a minister at Town Proper Church of Christ in the same town as Colosio. He's a young man. That's his girlfriend. They'll probably get married probably sometime next year. This is a young man whose house burned down last year or the year before, and the congregation, you as a people, donated a bunch of money to help him. And he's got his house probably 60% built in now. But he has learned our approach, taken it, and fallen in love with it. He's one of the ministers that travels around, hits a congregation at Santa Barbara and San Carlos and the different areas. Next one up there is Clemente Lazaga. He's in Town Proper Church of Christ. He is one of my aftercare directors. Clemente's got a heart of gold. He is a true definition of a servant. And it's his responsibility, the new Christians that come along, it's his responsibility to mentor, to teach, to make sure that do his very best to include them in the congregations, whether it's Town Proper, whether it's Santa Barbara or Colosio, that they don't fall through the cracks. Next to him in the corner is Michael Pereira. He's my other aftercare director. And I admire this young man. I cannot do what Michael does. He is constantly smiling. He is fearless when it comes to talking to people. And I mean, you can't help but like the young man. And I told Michael, you've got an ability that God gave you, and he's making use of it. He does the same thing Clemente does. They work as a team. In the picture here is June Gavina in the blue shirt and June Carrion in the yellow. They are two ministers in Santiago City, which is about 7 hours north of Colosio. When they were in the main church in Santiago City, under them, the congregation tripled the numbers. They have started a new congregation called Sandville Church of Christ, and it's one of 2 church plants in the area that are due to June and June. I can just call them the June brothers, and they're not related, but they might as well be. Where you see one, you're going to see the other. But we never asked them to join staff. We never asked them to come to the campaigns. But we first met them in 2017, and they've been following us with us as an ongoing team member ever since. This is Christian Corpuz in the lower middle. He's 25 years old. They've got a new baby, and I'll tell you about her later. That's his wife, Anna Rochelle. They live in just outside of Clausial, but every Sunday he travels about 2 hours to a town called Panicky, where he established a congregation. After he attended one of my workshops, which I didn't even know he was there, he baptized 11 of his friends within 6 months. There was no church building in the area, no congregation in the area. Trying to get a bus and get them to go to the nearest city was just not realistic for them. So they met in an empty lot outside of a house and started a congregation. We were there in 2020 where they originally had about 12 to 15 members. When we left, they had about 28, and now they're hitting about 40. Many of the young people do not attend Sunday morning because their parents are of a different faith and will not allow them to come, but they do allow them to come to the youth activities and the fellowships that they have. And the average age of this congregation, believe it or not, would be lucky to be 18. And very, very young. The future is in this age group. And they're young. I'll tell you more about their young people, but they're amazing, and they could teach us a lot. In the left-hand corner is Mark Collegio. Didn't know it at the time, but on our first trip to Colossia in 2012, he came and showed me a picture. And it's a picture of him standing next to my wife, Angela. And he says, "You remember?" And I go, "Yep, I still got that picture on my phone somewhere." And he's on staff member. Urban is grooming him to take over to be able to follow in his footsteps because we're wanting to grow and plan for the future. We don't want this good thing going to die when I get too old to get over there, and which I hope is a long ways away. But as we know, time hits us all. There'll be a time when I will not be able to go. But family, this is our main staff. These are the men that on your Global Mission Sunday, this is where your money goes to, is to support these young men. It's an amazing group. They work as hard now as they did when they didn't have the funds coming in from you. We don't have arguments. We don't have fights. We've had little minor things for 8 years, no major disagreements. It doesn't matter if one presents the gospel and wins 20 converts and another one does 2. It's all for one for all. It's just an amazing team. Their goal is getting people into Christ. As Ray Nelson says, we're trying to populate heaven, and that's what we're trying to do. And I love these men with all their heart. They are truly an inspiration to me, and family. Just thank you so much for your contribution on Sunday. You are literally putting food on their plate, clothes on their back, and a place to live. So from them through me, thank you so much for that. You are supporting an awesome work. Next slide. This is in Colossia where it all started in Pangasinan. This picture is 11 years old. This is 2012. And this is where we always start, where we fly into Manila and we drive about 4.5 hours into Colossia, and then we branch off from there. The first step we had, I can't even pronounce. San Carlos City was our first workshop. We will not do this again because I got there the 12th, and the first workshop was the 13th and the 14th. And this old carcass didn't adjust very well. I got sick and lost my voice 2 days later for 3 days, and I couldn't even whisper, and my lungs were all clogged up, so I had to see a doctor, and I think I got the same virus that's going around here. I think I caught it before I left, but I saw the doctor, and he gave me some antibiotics, and that cleared it up pretty fast. But while we were in San Carlos to stay with Rogelio, and I forgot his wife's name, they were brought up Roman Catholic. Very good people. The wife was 57. Rogelio was 51 years of age. And they at the end of the presentation, the wife said, "Well, I don't know." And the husband said no. And so a couple of the ladies came by and talked to him in their own native language. And we found out the obstacle was the husband thought that by being buried meant literally into the ground. When he found out that wasn't the case, he said, well, then absolutely, let's go. And then one question they had is, well, do we have to leave the worship at the church we were at to hear? My simple response was, where you attended, did they teach what we just learned today? And it says, okay, you're right. And so it's wonderful when you see people whose heart is open enough when they see the truth, they respond. So San Carlos is a small congregation. Next slide, please. The building is open front. This is it here. There are no doors. You could probably fit maybe 60 people in there if you tried. It's very typical of many of the church buildings in the Philippines. A congregation that is 60 members is considered a very large congregation in the Philippines. Unlike here, we don't consider that particularly large. But in the Philippines, it is. The good news is there are a lot of congregations of the church in the Philippines, mostly in the rural areas. But it's very much like the Church of Christ in the Bible Belt here in the United States. It's a very dominated by the Church of Christ, and as well as some of the Baptists. But the Church of Christ in the rural areas is fairly strong, although, as I say, the congregations are kind of small in number. Next slide. This is Urban Gonzalez baptizing his daughter, Grace Ann Gonzalez. Grace is 15 years old. In 2020, we tried to present the gospel to Grace. Urban thought his daughter might be ready, but after talking with her, decided she just wasn't. And so talking with her today, I sat down, was able to present the gospel to her and 3 of her friends, and she was ready. And it was special for me because she calls me Lolo, which means grandpa. And she's a very shy, very quiet girl. And this year was the first year where she opened up and we say, Lolo, I love you, and come give me a hug. Before that, it would be hard to even have her look my way. And so she's grown up and matured, and it was just a joy for Urban to baptize his own daughter. And so this is what's going on here on a Sunday afternoon after worship service. Next slide. That is a baptistry, by the way, in front of the Church of Christ building in Colossia. It's a big old cement, huge bathtub, really. This year we had the honor of having a couple special guests. There's Urban on one end, of course, that good-looking guy in the blue shirt on the other end. In the black shirt is Marco Cineret. He lives in Odessa, Texas. He was, while he was with We Care Ministries, the director of We Care in Mexico. Now he has to work full-time to support himself, and he wanted to come, so he came. Next to him is one of his best friends, and that's Ricardo Alvarez. He is the director of We Care Ministries in the entire country of Mexico. He does not speak English. He does not speak Tagalog. He only speaks Spanish, which was not a problem because being that Marco was born and raised in Mexico, he is fluent in Spanish, but Marco also speaks English. Ricardo had never been out of the country. This was his first time ever, and he was quite impressed with our work. Mexico is divided in 3 regions. He's got 3 major groups, one that works in northern Mexico, one in central, and another one in the southern Mexico. They were there for 10 days, and when Ricardo saw the work, he wanted to take all of our material that I used, and he's currently translating that into Spanish, and he will be passing that material on into all of Mexico. So that is awesome. I think that Ricardo is an absolute go-getter. He's humble. And the man just amazing. But he and the Filipino brothers just hit it off immediately. Marco plays guitar. He taught Ricardo, and Ricardo taught Alvin Pozario there later, and they just hit it off. And so we were honored to have them from another country, and that really encouraged our Filipino brothers. Next. This is Benteg Rosario in La Union, and that is the church building that you see there. There are no doors. They've got iron bars for windows, It's up in the mountainous area. I don't know how you'd find that place unless you knew about it. It's an old country road, windy. Some spots one car could go through, and if you hit a car coming the other way, sometimes you'd have to back up. That's Alvin Pizzario presenting the gospel to a couple young ladies who did obey the gospel, and they're studying while I'm doing the workshop in the area. In the upper right-hand corner is Ricardo and Marco, and they are praying. And while Urban is the one presenting the gospel, Marco and Ricardo are praying for the work that's going on. It's a beautiful area, and it's a little cooler there, so we enjoyed that. As I say, it is really fairly remote, and if you didn't know it was there, you'd never find it. Next slide. This is Panicky Church of Christ. I guess it's a congregation where Christian established his church there. He had an uncle who had a small landlocked piece of property. So Christian, out of his own funds, which is not very much, came to an agreement with his uncle and purchased the property. That building is made out of bamboo and with a tin roof. It's probably 30 by 20 in diameter. It does have a cement floor with 2 light bulbs and 2 fans. And that is their church building right now. They are hoping to raise funds where they can expand it and make it into a more permanent building. But this is where they hold their services. And the kids are next slide please, are amazing. He has to, believe it or not, he has to tell the kids, you've done enough. Because they're out there weeding, they're out there fixing the property on their own after school, and he's having to tell them, slow down. They are really motivated teenagers. This is the inside of that church building. And if you notice in the right-hand picture, that handsome guy holding that young girl, that's Christian's daughter. And she's kind of sweet because her name's Stephanie. So I mean, it's an honor to have someone love you enough that they want to name their kids after you. And I didn't ask them, but she let me hold her. They've taken my picture every day. They would show her my picture, tell her my name, say Lolo, and she wasn't the least bit scared. I mean, she's right at 13 or 14 months old, and just a sweet little girl. But that's inside of the church building in Panicky. Next slide. We're in Santiago City now. And in Santiago City is a small congregation called the Sandville Church of Christ. It's being founded it was planned by June and Carrion and Gavina. And we had a workshop right next to one of the people's residence where they pitched a tent over there, and we did the workshop outside. I was introduced to a lady by the name of Daisy Lopez. She was born and raised Catholic. Very good English. I was very surprised at her proficiency in English. Presented the gospel to her, and it was like a bird eating out of your hand. I mean, she just, we talked about original sin. She had a question about that. She had a question about baptism. Why isn't it pouring in that? And we answered those questions. Well, when we got to Acts 22:16, where Ananias asked the Apostle Paul, what are you waiting for? Get up. And she's reading it 3 or 4 or 5 times and looking at me, and she says, well, I'm not ready. I said, okay. And so I don't agree with pushing people, but I don't believe it's wrong to encourage. So I asked, well, Daisy, what if the Lord were to come right now? What would Jesus take you to heaven? And I had a chart drawn out of the death, burial, and resurrection and baptism. One corner says lost, and that one says saved. So she goes back to Acts 22:16 and starts reading it again. And I said, Daisy, what are you doing? It's amazing. He said, I'm arguing with myself. Never heard that phrase before. But finally, she points to that picture. She says, I'm a sinner. I'm lost. So, Daisy, what do you want to do? I want to get saved. I need to get baptized. So we brought a change of clothing, and on the left there is that portable baptistry that they have. And I was honored to baptize her into Christ. She came out smiling. She was so happy. And that's Daisy's story. Next slide, please. This is a hotel where I stayed at, called the Zen Hotel. I don't like the showers. The faucets got needle-thin spurts. The water pressure is so high it feels like you're getting a treatment of acupuncture. And I mean all over, barring none. So I finally learned a trick how to lower the pressure. The other problem is it's cold water. So not very pleasant. But this is Mike and Melody Brown. Mike, as you see, is not hardly quite a midget. He served in the Special Forces in the Army, I believe. He is retired on disability, and then he decided to reside in the Philippines. He's got 2 children. One suffers from Asperger's, a severe case of Asperger's, but he's got a heart of gold. Just an amazing man. He's told the congregation they're trying to raise funds to purchase land. He says, when you buy the land, I will help contribute towards building the building. But when he found out that I'm a meat and potatoes guy, he said, much to my chagrin, I like that hotel. You know why? Because a block and a half is McDonald's. Unfortunately, all the McDonald's in Santiago City were closed. So he found out, so he invited us to our house, and he says, what do you want for dinner? I says, cheeseburgers. So he had cheeseburgers, wedges, some other, not just myself, but all of our brothers that went with us. The next Sunday, during the Sandville workshop, his wife Melody came and made cheeseburgers for lunch, which I really wasn't hungry because I don't eat lunch, but how can I say no? And the next night, he again brought us to have dinner with him. And then the last night, when we were leaving Santiago City, he brought dinner for me that night. Finally, he said, Stephen, next time you come to Santiago City, you get to stay at our house, and we've got everything. And so the man is just amazing. His wife Melody is a sweetheart. So I'm looking forward to reuniting with this couple again. Next slide. In the Philippines, we study anywhere. We've studied outside people's homes. We've studied under trees, in forests, in front of the church building there. It doesn't matter. Where there's an opportunity, we're not limited by living room or rooms. As long as we can, we've even done it with everybody standing up. Next slide. And we also baptize anywhere either. Baptizing in a river or in the ocean is not uncommon in the Philippines. It's very commonplace. Swimming pools. In the Philippines, they don't call them public swimming pools, they're called resorts. They refer to them as resorts. And even though we're not going to be swimming in these pools, we still have to pay admission, usually just for the person that's being baptized. A couple of them, though, say if you've got 12 people coming in, you got to pay for all 12, even though only 2 will be entering the water. The center picture is in Quezon City, which is just outside of Santiago City. The right where Urban is, that's in Calasiao. And then the yellow tub, that is in Cabanatuan City, in a Tandol Church of Christ. Next slide. This is an amazing story. The young man in blue, his name is Gio. Right now, he's 11 years old. He started attending the church in Quezon 2 years ago when he was 9 years old. At about the age of 10, he was baptized into Christ. But he wasn't happy about that. So he started bringing his grandma to church, and she obeyed the gospel. Then he brought his mother to Christ. She obeyed the gospel. And this week, on the day that we had a travel day, nothing scheduled, we studied with Joe Marr, who was brought up Methodist. Joe Marr obeyed the gospel as well. So we have an 11-year-old boy who brought his entire family to Jesus. He's really shy, really a quiet boy. But I told Joe Marr, you're a hero in my book. He says, you're a soul winner. And he's 11 years old. Quite a young man, very quiet. But he loves his Lord. He's an amazing young man. Next slide. This is in Tyndall, in Church of Christ in Cabatuan, where we saw 14 obey the gospel this day. The lady on the left, the older lady, is Josephina. She is 57 years old, brought up of Methodist background. And these are not all of the 14 that obeyed the gospel. We were there in Tyndall about 5 years ago, where the congregation was 26, and when we left in 2 days, they were 56. And they've continued to maintain those numbers. And so we want to come back, and one of our things that we have decided to do is stay in contact in areas where we're seeing a lot of fertile ground and maintaining relationships. Cabatuan is one area where this is our second trip back. We won't go there next year, but probably every 2 or 3 years, we're going to be back visiting some of these congregations to strengthen the ties, do some aftercare, whatever the leaders of the congregation want. The leader is a 25-year-old man, and he just an amazing man. His parents brought him up right. Next slide. This is Katrina. This is Keisha Jamaica Costa in the Tyndall Church of Christ. 5 years ago, when we were there, they visited us when we were in Iligan, which is about 2 hours away, and we were doing 2-day workshops there. And she wrote a note saying, "We can hardly wait to see you the next day." So Kiervan, I think her brother's a mischief maker, kind of like me. He said she won't be able to make it today. So I was disappointed. So later that day, I'm talking to Kiervan, looking at him, and Kiervan says, "Well, you better turn around. There's someone making a beeline towards you." Turned around, it was Keisha, and I got lots of hugs, and I love getting loved on. She's 19 now, going to college and going to school, and just a sweetheart. Next slide. These are precious memories that God gives you, rewards for you during your mission work. This is Katrina. I baptized her 6 years ago when she was, I think, 15 or 16. And on Facebook, I saw this post where it says, the preacher you remember the most is his gospel preacher, Brother Stephen Prine. And then I thanked her for it, and she wrote something else. Kiervan told her I wouldn't be there that day. And so I'm sitting in front of the church building. When she saw me, boy, she made a beeline and just said, I was told you weren't going to be here. And just a sweet girl. She's president of her class and head of some committee. And my point is, it's so nice to see people that you've obeyed the gospel 5, 6, 7 years ago. They're growing and they're still faithful. Next slide. This is Mary Chris. 2017, I baptized in her Christ. Her nickname is the Crying Lady. And at the end of the presentation, she stood up and just started bawling. I mean, just turned on the faucets. She stood up, turned around, and then buried her neck in my shoulder, just crying for 15, 20, 30 seconds. Didn't stop crying till we got her into Christ. Still faithful. She's now married to a minister and is a mother of 2. Next slide. This is Chris and Angelica. This is a small village outside of Colosio. If you looked at it, it would be what we would call the slum. There were houses with no roofs, dilapidated. It's really heartbreaking to see it. But who's it? Not Michael. It was Christian who presented the gospel to Chris. Chris saw it right away and wanted to obey, but he says, "You need to talk to my wife, Angelica," but Angelica is deaf and dumb. And so Christian didn't know what to do. And I said, "Well, you don't have to read scripture word for word. As long as she believes Jesus is the Son of God, and she believes that in heart and understands what's going on, So we started having her husband sign to his wife what he does. He shines back, I know that Jesus is the Son of God. He died to forgive me of my sins. I need to be baptized. That's where I became a Christian. Turns out that she'd been on studies and she'd seen much of this before. So we got to baptize this family into Christ. Next slide. And this is the reason to come back home. That's little Juniper. He's 8 months. And that's my oldest son, Derek. That picture of Derek is just a day old. And we went up to the mountains in Oakland and took that picture. That's why I'm in such a hurry to get home. That's my wife and my family's dear to me. I was gone for a month this time, and that's a long time. So we're probably going to cut it down to 3 weeks. The wear and the tear on a month's travel is really hard. 16-hour flights, there's a lot of travel time, some dead time, which is inherent in your traveling. But that's next slide, please. That's a presentation. Just want to again say thank you for your support for these ministers, for the support for this work. I would just ask, we're making plans for next year to go to the Visayas Islands, Cebu, where we can expand our reach. We're always in need of funds. COVID has really hit hard, but God's always provided. So if you want to contribute, just make it to Church of Christ here in Turlock. The eldership has graciously agreed to continue handling the funds for this work. So if extra funds, it would be greatly appreciated. It will go towards the work. You can see the great work. We had 76 obey the gospel in a month. 76. And that brings us to a total of 2,383 or something like that. We're just shy of 2,400. That number's real low because we don't get all the numbers. The thing that I know is God knows, and that's what counts. So, family, I love you. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your help, because this doesn't happen without all of you. It just doesn't happen. I'm willing to work, and I want to work, but I can't do it myself. But you're part of this work, so if this is what you have done, and this is what you've accomplished. So we have an invitation song, and if you have any needs, whether it's to obey the gospel or have something on your heart, won't you come while we stand and sing?